the process of becoming a priest, what lay Catholics don't even know. This is Dive Deep. From the Diocese of Springfield in Illinois, this is Dive Deep, where we dive deep into our Catholic faith. I am Andrew Hansen, and if you're like me, you see those posters on our parishes, and you see all our seminarians. Of course, we're praying for all of them, but you might have some questions like, well, what's the process of becoming a priest? What do we look for in our future priests? What are red flags when people are applying for the seminary? And all those like pre-theology 2 and 3, what the heck did all that mean? The cost of sending our future priest to the seminary. Tons of questions that I have as a lay Catholic, so we decided to bring in Father Brian Alford. He is the director for the Office for Vocations to clear it all up for us. Father Alford, thanks for coming on Dive Deep. How are you?
Glad to be here. Thanks, Andrew. Good to be here.
Well, you do an awesome job, first of all. It's a tough job, I know, especially in our culture of trying to recruit men to even consider the priesthood. And I know we often say, if you have that inkling to become a priest, the best way to figure that out is to go to the seminary, and there's no harm, of course, in discerning out. That's one thing I've always respected about you. It's no pressure, but that is the best way to, for our future priests to figure things out. The first thing I want to ask you, just right out of the gate, what are you looking for in a priest? So a young man comes to you and says, Father Alfred, I think I'm being called to the priesthood. What are some things that you're, at least right out of the gate, you're like, does he have this? Is he this? Is he this? That are benchmarks for you?
I would say over the years, so one attribute that I've really valued maybe more than anything else is that the man is normal. It may sound sort of funny, but I think normal in the sense that they are taking their faith seriously, that they kind of have an awareness of who they are, how they come across, their ability to just interact with others is a pretty good indicator about sort of their readiness to maybe go further in that conversation. So I'd say just normal, but I also say the other thing is that they're open to considering that God may be calling me to this. If they just say, Lord, I know I'm called to become a priest, it's a little bit of a flag because there's a discernment that goes on his side, but also on our side as well. So I think some openness, humility, and just being normal are the three things that I hope to find.
When you say normal, one thing that kind of came into my thought, and I want to ask you about, the general consensus is our younger generations have a difficult time with the oral conversation because we're stuck behind screens, and have you found the young people, or it's more challenging to kind of have that nice face-to-face conversation, or are people who are considering the priesthood in general, they're kind of, I'll call them an outlier to begin with, and most of them tend to have those interpersonal skills to begin with?
Yeah, I would say that it depends on the man. There are certainly guys that have approached that really have a real comfortable sense of themselves and being able to speak well. And there are others that struggle. And I think that speaks to the need for formation and what formation can do, because a man that comes to us thinking about the priesthood is certainly not a priest at that point. And there's a lot that the church and the Lord does in that person's heart to help prepare them. And so I'm not so concerned that they're not able to maybe articulate things, or maybe they struggle a little bit with that face-to-face communication. But again, that's where we try to pay attention. Is there an openness? Is there a humility? And the Lord can do a lot of great things in a man's life whenever they're open to the process of formation. So yeah, there's struggles I think that some young men have initially, but I think that's sort of par for the course among young people these days.
Now, I don't want to give away some of the things that you're might be looking for, but are red flags? Is there anything someone may say that jumps out at you? Okay, I know you mentioned humility and being openness, and of course we can take the opposite of that. Those are probably some red flags. But anything else come to mind that when you meet a guy that are some red flags? Because of course us lay Catholics want to know that obviously there is due diligence happening here.
Yeah, I appreciate whenever men have a real love for the church and sort of faithfulness. But I always am a little bit concerned if they approach with a sense of, well, here's what's wrong with the church, and I feel like I'm being called to be a part of that solution. Every one of us, I think, is part of God's plan in bringing about renewal in the church for sure. But I think if there's a sense of kind of a rigidity that might be there to be critical about whether it's the Holy Father or things going on in the church, whatever it is, that if it seems as though there's a little bit of inflexibility or sort of it's just kind of a rigidity, that's a bit of a red flag. Not impossible, but it does sort of speak to where that man is at that point, and is he open enough to enter into sort of really thinking about and praying about and being formed in such a way to have his mind with the church and to really love the church.
Now let's talk about the process. So I'm a young man, I'm thinking about becoming a priest. What is usually step one is usually talk to your parish priest, right? I know there's Andrew dinners. I want you to talk about that. When do they meet with you? Do they meet with Bishop? Talk about kind of those initial steps when someone does finally say, I think I'm being called to the priesthood.
I think you said it right. The first contact really, I think, should be with a priest. And it's really through our parish priests that these young men have gotten to know and develop a relationship with, that they first feel comfortable with having the conversation. To reach out to me as vocation director, or more specifically, Father Rankin as the promoter for vocations, sometimes we've never met them, and there's a little bit of a hesitancy to share maybe what's going on in their life. But if it's a priest that has journeyed with them, who's been a father figure to them, a mentor, they're going to feel a lot more comfortable. And that's really where I think the best start is, to begin having that conversation with a priest that they're familiar with, because that priest has also gone through discernment. He has sensed the call early on at some point in his life, and so he knows the process of what a man goes through, the questions he might have. So I think that's definitely the first place to start. And then after that, then we have more individuals in place. Father Rankin, as I mentioned, is the promoter for vocations, but in each deanery we have a priest designated as an associate vocation director. And oftentimes, if we're aware of somebody who maybe reaches out to us, I'll sort of put them back in touch with whether it's their parish priest or that regional vocation director to start having that question and helping them with the discernment that is going on. More specifically, what's working in that man's heart as far as trying to notice, is this from the Lord? Is the Lord really considering inviting me to follow this path of life? So those conversations that I have with priests is so essential, as I said, because those priests have gone through that process themselves, and they're some of the best equipped to be able to dialogue with a man and journey with him, accompanying him in his discernment journey.
And throughout the years, I mentioned you guys have Andrew dinners where Bishop Oprocki is also involved. These take place in deaneries across our diocese. Andrew being the first apostle, why it's named after him. So what happens in these Andrew dinners? Are they kind of, again, are these people these are guys who are like, yes, I think I'm called? Or are they more like, maybe I'm just kind of here to feel things out? Tell us what happened as you guys make the rounds around the diocese.
Sure. The invitation really for that is not so much from the man who thinks he might be called, but rather from the priest who notices something within him. Just as in the Gospel of John, it's Andrew who, after having encountered Jesus, invites Peter to come and say, see this one we've been waiting for. And it's through that invitation that he comes to encounter Jesus himself. I think the same is true in our Andrew dinners, as we ask the priests of the deanery to look at young men that they know in whether they're parishes, schools that they serve, or other ways that they may encounter them, to notice qualities that may be make them a good priest, and then to just ask them, would you be willing to come to this dinner to hear about the priesthood? There's nothing to sign. You're not going to be forced into the seminary, but to just hear about the idea of the priesthood, to be introduced to it, just as Andrew introduced Peter to Jesus and became the first pope. So too, it's our hope that through that encounter, that invitation, their response to that invitation, that they might hear the possibility of the priesthood and begin to pray about it more seriously.
So when a man does then formally apply, what does that trigger here on the back end? Talk about, are there medical examinations, psychological background checks? What are those kind of safeguards in place to make sure, okay, maybe it's a normal person, but we do want to make sure we're getting a high quality individual?
Right. As I said, the work of discernment is on two sides. The man who is feeling the call to the priesthood, but also it's on behalf of the church. The church discerns a man as well, and that application process is the essential part of our discernment, getting to know him. And it's not just the vocation director that helps to make the decision to the bishop or a recommendation to the bishop, but there's others that are involved who so that we're not just one person looking at it. So we have a formal application process that there's a physical application that they fill out that asks basic information about their background, their family, what their education is, different questions about their past. We have them write a couple of autobiographies, one about their spiritual autobiography, so how the Lord has been working in their life, just to get a notion of what that relationship looks like. Also, just a personal autobiography. What are the main points in their life that sort of lay out a picture for us to understand who this man is? And that helps us, again, on the very first stages to just know who we're dealing with. And then we have further steps after that if everything in that initial round of data gathering looks good, then we would proceed with asking them to do a psychological evaluation, which is rather intense, and it looks at every aspect of the man's life just to highlight if there are areas for growth. More often than not, always really, the psychological evaluation will point out something that the man should work on. And I really encourage the men to receive that with gratitude and with humility, because it'll make them a better bridge in their relationship with other people. So that psychological evaluation comes out, and it's possible that something could come up that would be a concern for us, that would say, maybe given that, we need to look a little bit more closely about your readiness at this point to enter. And we may delay a man's entrance into the seminary so that they can address those things before entering into seminary, and the way they're not working on sort of the full-time work of being in formation and working on whatever those concerns are. So there's that. We do medical examinations just to make sure that their physical health is such that he can handle formation. I mean, if there was, God forbid, a serious illness that would really prevent them from being able to invest themselves fully into the life of the seminary, we'd probably want them to maybe look into that and see if it might be a barrier for their entering into formation. We also, like somebody applying for a job, we like to get feedback from other people who know them, teachers, employers, their home pastor, another priest who knows them, that can speak to various qualities about the man so as to give us some feedback from the outside. We don't discount what a man's reflection on himself is, but sometimes we can also be limited in what we understand, for good or for bad. Sometimes we fail to recognize some of the good qualities that we have, and as we share an autobiography, maybe we miss out on some of the other virtues that really stand out in the man that he's maybe not aware of. And so we get that feedback from other individuals as well. At some point, we have meetings with them. The vocation director, the promoter in particular, is journeying with them. I would meet with them at some point and get to know that person better if I've not already journeyed with them. We have an interview process with a board of individuals here at the diocese, some lay people, some priests, and ultimately our goal then is to look at all of that information and make a recommendation to the bishop to say, we recommend that you consider this man for acceptance, or we may decide to delay that. And then the bishop would have a meeting with that person, with that young man, and he would make the final decision. So the final decision is always with the bishop, but all the work that is done ahead of time is in service to helping him best know what to do with this man who is applying. And we've gone through that discernment and offer that recommendation to him.
And of course, if anyone who wants to work for the church or volunteer for the church, background checks are also part of that.
Sure.
Your answer, very long, very rigorous, which again, from a lay person's perspective, that's a good thing. That gives us confidence that, the men who are entering the seminary at least are in the right frame of mind, both physically, mentally, and spiritually, so they can actually pursue this potential vocation fully, as you mentioned. Okay. So there are some men who enter right out of high school. There's some who go to college and get, I'll call them normal degrees, if you want to use that for lack of better terms. How many years does it take to become a priest? What's that process like?
Yeah, anymore, I used to have an answer that it was about 6 years, and now I tend towards more like 7 years. If a man enters right out of high school, he's going to do a standard 4-year degree, which would be a bachelor's degree, focusing primarily on philosophy. And then there would be 4 years after that are more theological based. And so that would be 8 years. Now, in the case, as you mentioned, of a man who has a normal degree, a degree from some other field, like it's in my case, I was a computer from information systems and had been working for a while. So I didn't have the philosophy background that is necessary for studying theology. So we would have those men enter into seminary, and they would do a couple of years of philosophy to prepare them for the theology. And so traditionally, that's been about 6 years. But there's been some changes to seminary formation, first proposed by the Holy See several years ago, and then kind of ratified in the United States' program for priestly formation that was just published last year, that sort of changes the language a little bit about formation. And now there's always, regardless of when you enter into seminary, whether it's right after high school, after some college, or even after you've been out of college, there's a year that's called the propedeutic stage. And that stage is one in which men are sort of pulled out of the culture in which they find themselves, which is often very anti-Catholic and ordered towards a lot of sort of worldly things, a lot of anxiety, things like that, social media and whatnot. And that propedeutic year really helps them to enter into a community life, a life of living with other seminarians, focusing primarily on their spiritual formation and their human formation, so that as they enter into that time of formation, they set the most important foundations of how to live in community with one another, which will be a part of their whole seminary formation, and how to pray. It's only in communion with the Lord and having a deep relationship with Him that we truly are able to then enter into formation in an integral way, in which everything draws together, and the Lord sort of draws that all together. So that propedeutic stage is for everybody, no matter where they enter into formation. And then they enter into one of the other stages, which is now called discipleship stage, which is roughly connected to the study of philosophy, either as a college student or somebody who has a degree already. And then the study of theology is generally what's called the configuration stage, in which they're configuring themselves more and more to Christ the priest, so that whenever they are ordained, they can enter into that life, imitating Christ as much as possible. And then the very final stage is called the vocational synthesis phase. And that's when the men are ordained deacons at the end of their formal training in the seminary, sent out into a parish in the diocese to do about 6 months of ministry as a deacon in preparation for their ordination as a priesthood. So we're kind of in the transition process where all these things are changing, and so it's a little bit of an adjustment on everybody's part to what do we call these things, how do we label it, how many years is it? All of those things are now sort of contingent upon this new program for priestly formation.
Kind of like an internship is like the way I view it, which I think is great. You get out, kind of, you do your schooling, kind of leave for a bit. That obviously gets you more hands-on experience, see if that is for you, and you go back. Now, you kind of hit on a little bit. So I see the posters in all our parishes of all our seminarians, and I see, pre-theology and 3 and 4. Like, what does everything mean there?
Yeah, and again, this is the last year that we'll probably use that language, because before it was so much tied to where you were in your intellectual formation, and so much focus was put on sort of identifying a man in that regard. Now, intellectual formation is very significant, and it demands a lot of time, and so we would say, well, this man is in theology those final 4 years, first, second, third, or fourth. Pre-theology would be those who have an undergraduate degree, not in philosophy, and they're doing those 2 years of philosophy. And then we have college, the men that are in college formation. So now moving forward, it'll be, they're in the propedeutic stage for that first stage, where they're, discipleship, 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, however it maps with their year in formation, and then configuration, 1, 2, 3, and then vocational synthesis. So, this is the last year where it sort of will follow that old pattern of identifying where a man is in formation. And then next year it'll be confusing. People will say, what is propedeutic? I wish they would have chosen a different word that was easier to spell, because it's very difficult to spell. And then discipleship, configuration, it'll be an opportunity for us to move to a new lexicon of terms.
Well, I'm glad you're spelling it out right now.
Yeah.
All right. So in 2023, the diocese launched the Good Shepherd Society, where lay Catholics, and of course, anybody, priests, religious, deacons, can give and to support our future priests and the cost of educating our seminarians. So I want to talk about cost. Correct me if I'm wrong. First thing, if someone is right out of high school and they enter their 4 years of theology, they're on the hook for paying for that. Is that correct, or does the diocese help at all?
Yeah, we do help. So that they're studying philosophy at that point, and so what it is we make an investment, and not insignificant, where the diocese will pay for the room and board for the man. They stay at the college seminary in Indianapolis, Bishop Simon Brute. But they take classes in philosophy and other undergraduate bachelor's degree classes at Marian University. And so we ask them to pay for their tuition, get loans, of course, just like any college student would. And so we're making an investment. But, a man, as he's in, college seminary, doesn't yet quite fully know what he wants to do, and if that's what God is calling him to. And if he decides not to, he comes out of that time of formation with a degree, which is something that is to some extent marketable, if you will. It can help him to get a job. Men that are further along, so if they already have a college degree, the diocese is willing to pay for everything so as to not introduce an obstacle to them of, say, well, I'm not sure that I can afford going into seminary. We don't want it to be a detriment for them to enter into formation. But at the same time, especially in those earlier years, we want to make sure that there is some skin in the game, if you will, and that's where we ask our men. And we do have some mechanisms in place that if they are ordained priests, that they can work on entering an agreement to where that the loans that they may have taken out to help pay for their college academics tuition would be reimbursed to them on a monthly basis, such that ultimately that price is even covered by the diocese.
And in terms of cost, I mean, you can imagine the cost of any higher education times, we have, many seminarians over the course of the year, that figure goes up pretty high. I know it can vary year by year. So again, if you want to donate to the Good Shepherd Society and invest in our future priests, that's a great opportunity to do so. Any concern? Okay, so you mentioned that people right out of high school that will pay for a little bit of their theology. If they leave, do they have to reimburse us? And if not, is there any concern that someone might be doing that to get a quote, kind of partial free education? Yeah,
and I think that's where, first of all, we do not ask them to pay back the portion that we have paid. They would still be responsible for their tuition, those loans and whatnot. But we don't ask them to pay back. Some dioceses, I think, maybe have that policy, but we don't. And I think, it's a good question to say, could somebody be using the system for that? It's possible, but I think that's where our discernment and as you mentioned earlier, the rather extensive application process helps us to, I think, have a good understanding of what kind of man we're getting. And we'll be able to see through the various means that we use for collecting information to get a pretty good read on the man's character and hopefully be able to read if somebody is sort of using the system, if you will. In my 10 years as vocation director, I would say that's never really been a concern for me. So, I want the men to realize that the diocese is willing to make an investment and so that there can be some freedom. If there's a fear that they're going to have to pay back, and they're leaving and they're kind of discerning, well, I don't know if this is what God is calling me to. Well, maybe I'll just stay in so that I don't have to owe this extra money. We don't want that. That deprives them, I think, of some freedom from really entering into that formation and coming or going as the Spirit sort of prompts them to.
And that's a really good point. And quickly back on the cost, again, as us lay Catholics want to donate and help our priests, what's the budget for something like that? Is it around $1 million for our diocese to educate our seminarians?
I think at one point we were close to $1 million whenever we had 24 seminarians. Right now, it's less than that. We're currently at 15 seminarians. It's hard to know because each circumstance is a little bit different. So we offer, if a man is, let's say that he's in his configuration stage, those final 4 years, and he's in need of health insurance, we would provide all of that, and that can be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $60,000 a year for a man whenever you factor in room and board, tuition, insurance, and then a small monthly stipend that we give to them to help with some of the incidental costs of daily life. For college guys, it's a little bit less, but it averages out to where we're somewhere in the neighborhood of $45,000 or so per seminarian if we look at it, and then you multiply that out by the number of seminarians that we have.
So again, go to dow.org/give. That is where you can find a link to the Good Shepherd Society and donate to support our future priests and their education. What worries you the most when you think about our men on the campuses?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of worry. I think sometimes people worry that especially our men in college in those college years, they're at a co-ed campus and there are girls there, and they say, well, isn't that a threat to their vocation? I said, no, I mean they're going to have to deal with the reality of interacting with with females, and if most guys will say that they're attracted to women, and I said, well, that's good, that's normal, that's a very normal thing. Back to my normal point. So they're going to have to learn how to interact with all sorts of people, whether it's people that it's difficult to get along with, which there'll be plenty of those in the seminary, just among their community. Also with working with females, working with adults, and those things. So I'm not too concerned about that. I think one of the challenges is because sometimes in the seminary community, it's a beautiful experience to see the brotherhood that's there, the fraternity. They're not closed off from society, but they are separated a little bit from the rest of the world. And thanks be to God, they're not exposed to maybe some of the things that would be on a college campus. But nevertheless, I think one of my concerns is because of how fulfilling and what a great experience it is in community life. When they're ordained, it's not always the experience. Sometimes your first assignment, mostly in your first assignment, you are assigned with another priest, one priest, but maybe after a few years, you're out in a parish by yourself. And what was so nourishing and supportive of your vocation in living in community is no longer there. And so that's what I worry about with our men, maybe not taking that advantage to try to be intentional about building that support system whenever they do get out of seminary. And that's where I hope that this vocational synthesis phase really helps men to identify before they become priests how it is they're going to provide for that need for support, for brotherly fraternity. Find it especially in their brother priests, and not to be primarily finding that from parishioners. Not that we can't have friendships with parishioners, but first and foremost, our most important relationships should be with our brother priests.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because when I asked you that question, what worries you the most, I was going to come back with what worries me the most as a layperson is exactly what you said. Because, I mean, I can relate to it. Going to college, it was awesome. And then my first job, I went to a city where I knew no one, and boom, you feel like you just got whiplash. But one thing I think you guys are doing a great job of, talking to our priests across the diocese, they get together seemingly every other week or at least monthly for community and hanging out with each other in rectories. Of course, having that bonding, also, spiritual, brotherhood. How much of that are you trying to continue to promote that? Like, guys, we need to stick together. And the best way to do that is to intentionally just hang out with each other.
Yeah, we certainly in the seminary, we try to foster that. It's a challenge whenever our seminarians study at seminaries outside of the diocese, but there are opportunities when they are home. And I really, emphasize how valuable that is for the men to be there and to just enjoy that time with one another, to come back together. And among the priests, it's a constant challenge for sure. And I think every priest has to make it a priority for himself to try to do what he can to make sure that fraternity and that friendships that are so life-giving to us are something that they prioritize. From the diocesan perspective, from my role as vicar for clergy, we try to provide some of those elements with our convocation, our march overnight, retreat, things like that. But that's only starting the process of what needs to be a more integrated experience among priests, trying to find creative ways oftentimes, and being intentional about making time for one another.
So if a guy comes to you in the middle of the seminary and says, I think I'm having doubts about becoming a priest, what do you say? What do you do? What's the process at that point?
First thing I asked him, I said, have you talked to your spiritual director about that? Our spiritual directors, every seminarian is assigned to a spiritual director. They choose a spiritual director who's helping them to pray through the things that are going on in formation, but also with their discernment as well, and to also talk with their formators. One of our formators from one of the seminaries said that it's his goal to know our men better than we do. And I think that's very true because they spend far more time than I will with them. And so they know our men. So I often will then go to whoever that formator is, maybe ask them about the discernment that's going on. let them weigh in on that before we just say, okay, yeah, that's fine. Go ahead and go. So really just ask, have you been doing the proper steps of inviting others into it? Or is it just sort of a reaction to maybe something that's going on within you and don't know quite how to handle it? So the easiest thing is to maybe withdraw, but to rather go through and use the support system that is there in the seminary. That's such a wonderful blessing for us in many ways. Spiritual director, therapist, formator, all of those will help to help the man kind of come to that decision. And if it is, determined that he should step away, I always tell him, I'm grateful for your willingness to enter into formation. I'm not disappointed. I'm grateful that you have been open to the Lord's call, and I have no doubt that your investment, your giving this a shot, will benefit you and will benefit the church. The church always wins whenever we seek to do God's will and are serious about it, even if it turns out in a different direction than maybe we thought it initially would.
And that's such a refreshing response, because again, the lay faithful, if you want to be, we want you to be 100% in. I would say, if there's one job, I'll call it a job at this point, we want you to be all in for. It's the priesthood. All right, so you mentioned 6 to 8 years for seminarians. What are they learning? Okay, obviously I can be, they're learning theology, they're learning about the Bible. Give us some more specifics on, because that seems like an awful long time. So what are some of the specific things you guys are learning in the seminary?
Yeah, we start out with philosophy, and philosophy, helps us to understand really how to think and how people have thought. So it's some of the medieval philosophy, St. Thomas Aquinas, Aristotle, and things like that really are at the foundation of so much of the theology that we have. So to understand that language of philosophy, especially sort of those Catholic thinkers throughout the centuries, are so essential for entering into a fruitful study of theology. But it's also helpful to have sort of an awareness of more modern and contemporary philosophies that are out there, because everybody that we encounter, whether it's in the news, in our pews, things like that, they are not operating necessarily out of sort of scholastic philosophy. They're based on a sort of a worldly philosophy. Whether they know it or not, the culture has been influenced by different philosophies. And for us to have an understanding of that is helpful, because we know then how it is we need to proclaim the gospel in the midst of that. So that's a necessary foundation. As uninteresting and difficult as sometimes studying philosophy is, it's so helpful. Then whenever you study philosophy or theology itself, it's everything. I mean, we have various classes that are related to Scripture so that we can understand, the Word of God, which we will be proclaiming every day and trying to help people connect that in their lives. We study about the sacraments. We celebrate the sacraments, so it's helpful for us to know what it is we're celebrating, what those effects are, what the graces are, all of those things. We study about the history of the church. It's good to know where we come from and the ways in which we have come to where we're at now, and have an appreciation for that. We study about, grace, sin, death, eternal life, what we call eschatology. So we sort of touch on every aspect of our Catholic faith so that we can explain it in whatever circumstance we find ourselves. It might be in a homily that we give. It might be a bulletin article that we write. It might be at the bedside of somebody who is dying and is asking a question. Is it okay for me to do this, or is it okay for to not take on this particular type of treatment? So all of those things assist us in some way in the ministry that we will do for the people of God. And so we cover everything, because there's not one area of theology that isn't some way confronted by a priest in his daily ministry.
Do you remember back to your seminary days? Was there something in your class where you're like, what? I thought it was the other way, or I thought it was something completely different. You're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I think where I find that most is probably things that were related to Scripture. We don't have necessarily as Catholics sometimes the strongest foundation in Scripture. And so here you come and study from somebody who has done a lot of work in studying the Scriptures, and it just, the way that certain things open up about, this is why this word is used, or this is what this word means. It's just sometimes just mind-blowing. Even now, I so appreciate whenever you have somebody that's really deep in Scripture, like Dr. Scott Hahn, whenever we had him for the Eucharistic Congress, just the way that he's able to unpack those things. And Dr. John Bergsma, who came and gave us our convocation a couple of years years ago, the ways in which Scripture, speak to where we are now and the various ways in which the Word of God speaks to us, you think, well, I've got a pretty good idea on what the Word of God is, and then you hear something from somebody who studied it and prayed with it and sees it in maybe a little bit different and broader way than you do, and it's so eye-opening and so refreshing that there are many times where I'm like, wow, I never saw it that way. I never really expected to see that interpretation. So
one thing I remember having a conversation with some of our new priests, and one thing that struck me that I didn't know is you guys do like pretend confession and just kind of that role play, which I thought was obviously, I'm like, that makes total sense. Like that I thought that was fascinating. When you, in terms of other things you learn, okay, so priests, number one, obviously is fulfill your priestly role, but I'll use the word, unfortunately, you guys are tasked with HR issues and budgeting and financing and properties. Now, granted, you have the curia at the office for the diocese to help you with these things. Do you get any classes or any sort of education on at least just the basics of kind of those, I'll call them non-theological things? I mean, you're running some of these parishes, these budgets are 7 figures and you're ultimately responsible for the whole ship.
Yeah, that's a question that's brought up many, many times, and there are some seminaries that have maybe some electives and maybe even some required classes that do speak about parish administration and things that you need to know. The things that we find that each diocese is different from the next, and so to present some principles is helpful, but where it really takes root is whenever we see how it's actually done, and so you miss out on something of that in the seminary, and that's why whenever we have our newly ordained priests, right before they're ordained, we gather them, we introduce them to various members of the curia who introduce them to how things are done here, whether it's insurance, how your pay works, various things related to HR that they would need as new priests. And then whenever we have new pastors, again, they've been exercising their priesthood, or primarily working with the ministry and whatnot. Now they're going to be asked to take on some more administrative roles. And if they would have learned something, a couple years ago in the seminary, it's probably not real fresh in their minds. And so it's a good opportunity for us to introduce or reintroduce those principles, yet to do so in the context of, here are the resources that are available to help you with this. The Curia staff has been extremely generous and very helpful, I know, in my roles as a pastor in a couple different parishes, to help me to understand I don't have to have it all figured out. I don't have to have all the answers, but we can find somebody that can get those answers, that can help us with that. What we bring to the table is something that others can't bring, and that's the ability to celebrate the sacraments, to preach the Word of God in a way that is helpful in guiding the people and hearing their confessions. And so that's why I think it's not bad that almost all of our time in the seminary is preparing us for what we alone can do. And these other things don't necessarily have to be done by a priest. Traditionally, historically, they have been done by priests, but it might also be an indication in the future of ways in which the lay faithful who have far greater skills in that can assist us so that we can do what we need to do, and they can assist us in the fulfilling of those various duties of parish administration.
Gosh, I still always feel bad for you guys though, and you gotta deal with HR issues or budgeting, because it's like, we want you to have your attention on the sacraments and the Mass. I know that's part of the job, but gosh, it is somewhat like, I wish Father didn't have to deal with all that. What emphasis has changed over the years in our seminary schools? Have you seen, when you think back maybe a decade ago, 20 years ago to now, is there any philosophical change in terms of we want our men to now know more about this or focus more on this? How has education changed?
I think especially since Pope Francis has become our Holy Father, he's really emphasized a lot more evangelization. That's not to say at all that John Paul II and Pope Benedict didn't. I know they both wrote extensively on that topic, but it seems as though there's a greater thrust in sort of this notion of missionary discipleship and to try to form the priests to be those evangelists, because what is happening is the world around us is becoming less and less Christian, and so our men are being prepared to go into a field that is less and less open to the message of the gospel. And so what does that look like for a man to be formed sort of as an evangelist? to be sure, we've got a long way to go. I would say seminary probably doesn't look a whole lot different now than it did whenever I was in 12 years ago. But I would say that I think that's the general shift. And really, when the Holy Father put out some new instructions for seminary formation, it really made missionary discipleship kind of as a key that should undergird so much of our formation. And I think also really that highlights the need for a deep interior life. So our spiritual formation, I think, is just getting stronger and stronger. But also, I think, to really continue to build on what John Paul II gave to us, and that's a beautiful sort of focus and attention to human formation. Our men are struggling with more and more things, with anxiety and depression and whatnot. And so to be able to help them in healing what is maybe broken in them in a human way is going to be of the service to the people of God. John Paul II uses this image of our humanity as a bridge between the people of God and God himself. And so if our humanity is broken or somehow insufficient, it's going to be hard for us to be that instrument for them, that bridge for them. And so I think the seminaries have really done a phenomenal job in addressing some of what are the more contemporary human-related issues that need to be healed in our men so that they can go and be effective instruments themselves, but also in helping others who are maybe struggling with similar things.
I'll get you out on this one, Father Alford. If you were a seminarian, I would ask, what's the most surprising thing that's happened to you in the seminary? But I'll ask that to you. When you look back on your years in seminary, what ultimately surprised you the most?
Wow, that's a good question. I think I think what has surprised me most is just the power of being an instrument of God's mercy in the confessional. In my assignment currently at the cathedral, we hear a lot of confessions, which is a real blessing. But it just, I'm in awe from the first time I was hearing confessions in my first assignment to now, just what a powerful experience that is. And as you mentioned, we do these practice confessions, which are kind of funny in the seminary. But whenever you're there, it's real life. I mean, these are people with real struggles. They're coming sometimes with a real sense of desperation. And to be able to give to them some counsel, and most importantly, to give them the words of absolution and to see and hear the weight lifted from them, it never ceases to amaze me of what powerful gift that is, and something that intellectually I knew was so significant, but seeing it lived out in the ministry of mercy has been very life-giving and transforming for me.
Interesting conversation, Father Alford. You definitely enlightened me. I have a better understanding on what's going on. Really cool things. It's really cool to know as a layperson how much goes into it, to everything. I mean, of course, we all expect that too, but what you laid out today, it is rigorous, it is thorough, and ultimately it's about having men who want to be priests and to serve the best way they can. So, Father Brian Alford, thanks for coming on Dive Deep.
Thanks.
You got it. This has been Dive Deep. Hey, make sure to pray for our priests, of course, and our seminarians, future priests, and go to .org/give so you can support the Good Shepherd Society. This has been Dive Deep. For more podcasts, head over to dial.org/podcast. And until next time, we'll see you right here on Dive Deep.